After Esther's passing, a heavy cloud of grief settled over Ojapani. Mama Ikit, despite her resilience, found herself overwhelmed by sorrow. The once vibrant elder who had woven the threads of tradition and hope in the community was now a shadow of herself. Esther's death had taken a piece of her heart, and as the weeks passed, she grew increasingly frail. The house that once echoed with laughter and stories now seemed filled with a hollow silence, broken only by the wind that whispered through the trees. Mama Ikit couldn't bear to be alone in the compound she had once shared with her husband and Esther. She would sit on the wooden stool outside her door, gazing at the fields where Esther used to play, speaking to the spirits of her lost loved ones. Her voice a soft murmur carried away by the breeze. But as time went on, her strength waned, and she fell ill, unable to care for herself or even gather water from the stream. The villagers, absorbed in their own struggles, did not notice the old woman's fading presence. One morning, as the sun rose behind the hills, the villagers realized they had not seen Mama Ikit in days. She had not visited the market, nor had she been to church on Sunday. Her small mud house sat still, its door closed, and a strange silence surrounded it. It was not until a foul stench began to emanate from her compound, attracting vultures that circled in the sky, that the villagers decided to investigate. A small group of neighbors, with their faces etched with worry, approached her home. They knocked on the door, calling out her name, but there was no answer. Hesitantly, they pushed the door open, and the sight that met them was one of horror. Mama Ikit lay lifeless on her mat, her body cold and stiff, surrounded by flies and the smell of decay. She had died alone, her hands clutching a faded photograph of Esther. The discovery sent a shockwave through the village. Cries of sorrow filled the air as the community gathered around her home. Tears flowed freely, and women wailed as they recounted the strength and wisdom of Mama Ikit, lamenting that she had died with no one by her side. The elders of the Ojapani community called an emergency meeting under the giant Irako tree to discuss her burial. It was decided that Mama Ikit deserved a proper send-off. She would be buried beside her husband, her daughter and Esther, in the family plot under the shade of a large palm tree. The villagers pooled their resources, preparing a modest ceremony to honor her memory. But beneath the sorrow, there was a growing unease, an unsettling feeling that lingered in the air, like a storm waiting to break. After Mama Ikit's burial, strange occurrences began to haunt the village. On moonless nights, a chill would creep through the air, and villagers spoke in hushed tones of shadows moving near Esther's grave. People claimed to hear whispers in the wind, voices calling their names from the darkness, and some even swore they saw Esther's silhouette wandering through the fields where she once played. Rumors spread that Esther's restless spirit had returned, seeking those who had caused her suffering. The stories of her visits grew more terrifying, of a figure with sunken eyes, dressed in the old-school uniform she used to wear, standing in the shadows, her voice filled with sorrow. Those who had been closest to the events of her tragic life, especially David and the herbalist, were particularly affected. David, who had once charmed Esther and left her to face her troubles alone, became a nervous wreck. He would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with a sensation of a cold hand gripping his shoulder. He began to see Esther's face in every shadow, her eyes filled with silent accusation. He tried to flee the village, but everywhere he went, he felt her presence, as if she were walking just behind him, her footsteps echoing through his mind. The herbalist, who had given Esther the deadly concoction, suffered a fate even worse. He became a recluse, locking himself in his shack on the edge of the village. He spoke of hearing Esther's voice every night, begging him to undo what he had done. His hands, once steady as he mixed his herbs, began to tremble, and he claimed that Esther's spirit would knock on his door, whispering of the pain he had caused. He fell ill, his body wasting away, haunted by visions of a young girl weeping in the corner of his room. The once peaceful village of Ojapani became a land of fear and dread. People avoided walking near Esther's grave at night, and mothers warned their children to stay away from the old family compound. Whispers of an evil spirit spread like wildfire, and every shadow became a potential threat. The air grew thick with tension, and even the animals seemed to sense it. Dogs howled at night, and the village chickens refused to roost near the graves. As the villagers gathered under the Iroko tree for another emergency meeting, the elders spoke of the curse that seemed to have befallen their land. They believed that Esther's spirit, angered by the betrayal and suffering she endured, could not rest in peace. The elders decided to perform a cleansing ritual, calling upon the spirits of their ancestors to soothe Esther's soul and release the village from the grip of fear. On the night of the ritual, the entire village gathered at the family plot, holding torches that flickered in the wind. The elders chanted ancient prayers, offering sacrifices of kola nuts and palm wine to the spirits. They pleaded for forgiveness, for peace to return to their land. As they chanted, a strong wind swept through the trees, extinguishing the torches and sending a chill down everyone's spine. For a moment, it seemed as though the darkness itself had swallowed the village whole. But then the wind died down, and a strange stillness settled over the graveyard. The elders took it as a sign that the ritual had been accepted. They hoped that Esther's spirit would finally find rest, and that the shadows haunting their village would lift. Yet, even after the ritual, the feeling of unease never fully left Ojapani. The villagers went back to their routines, but they could never forget the tragedy that had unfolded in their midst. The dreams that had been crushed, the lives that had been lost, and the unspoken fear that lingered in the corners of their hearts. The village was never quite the same, marked forever by the sorrow of Esther's story and the lingering echoes of a past that refused to be forgotten. And there, beneath the shade of the palm tree, the graves of Esther, her mother, and Mama Ikit lay side by side, a somber reminder of the fragility of life, the weight of secrets, and the unbreakable bonds of love that endure even beyond death.